Your approach is too old school for modern business, the CEO declared, terminating my 16-year career with a dismissive wave. His son smirked from the corner, already measuring my office for his furniture. I was replaced before I even packed my desk. 6 months later, I watched their faces light up as they pitched my innovation to a room full of eager investors. They never imagined I'd be there, or that I documented every step of my creation process. I calmly slid a single folder across the table, knowing everything was about to change. I still remember my first day at Nexus Innovations 16 years ago. Fresh out of college with my computer science degree, I walked into that modest office space with dreams bigger than my student loan debt. Walter Graham, the founder, hired me personally, despite my lack of experience. "I see something methodical in you, Jenna," he told me. "This industry needs more people who think before they code." Those early years shaped everything about my professional identity. While other developers rushed to push out flashy features, I documented everything meticulously. I tested exhaustively. I questioned assumptions others took for granted. Walter appreciated this approach. And as the company grew from 10 employees to over 200, I rose through the ranks. By my 10th anniversary, I was the technical director overseeing our core products. "Your attention to detail saved us millions in potential security breaches," Walter said during my promotion ceremony. Never lose that methodical spirit. We had built something special at Nexus. Our software wasn't the flashiest, but it was rock solid, reliable. In an industry plagued by breaches and bugs, our products just worked. Hospitals trusted our systems. Financial institutions relied on our security protocols. We weren't the biggest name in tech, but we had earned respect through consistency and care. Everything changed when Walter announced his retirement 3 years ago. At 65, he deserved to enjoy the fruits of his labor. The transition plan had been in place for months. David Parker, Walter's son-in-law, would take over as CEO. David had an MBA from Wharton and experience in venture capital. He talked constantly about disruption and moving fast. In our first executive meeting after Walter's departure, David made his vision clear. "We've been too conservative for too long," he announced, standing at the head of the conference table in his perfectly tailored suit. "While we've been carefully building, our competitors have been sprinting ahead. It's time to disrupt or be disrupted." I tried to explain that our methodical approach was our competitive advantage, but David seemed allergic to caution. Every suggestion I made was met with an eye roll or a dismissive. "That's exactly the thinking we need to evolve beyond." Within months, he had hired a new marketing team, revamped our branding, and changed our development processes to increase velocity. The real trouble began when Tyler Parker, David's son, joined the company. 27 years old with an MBA but zero technical experience, Tyler was immediately given the title of Innovation Director. In our first one-on-one meeting, he asked me to get him up to speed on all our core technologies. "I'm really excited to learn from someone with your experience," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something condescending in the way he emphasized experience, as if my years of knowledge were somehow a liability rather than an asset. Over the next few months, Tyler shadowed me closely. He asked endless questions about our systems, our processes, and especially about my current project, an algorithm I'd been developing to dramatically improve energy efficiency in cloud computing environments. This was potentially breakthrough work, reducing server energy consumption by nearly 40% without performance loss. "This could be huge," Tyler said, peering over my shoulder at my notebook, where I kept my most critical insights. "Mind if I take some notes?" Against my better judgment, I shared my work openly. After all, we were colleagues, and knowledge transfer was part of healthy company culture. But something felt off in the way Tyler studied my materials, photographed my whiteboard diagrams, and asked specifically about documentation. the company culture shifted rapidly under David's leadership. Suddenly, everything was about moving fast and breaking things, a philosophy completely at odds with our established reputation for reliability. In team meetings, Tyler began openly questioning my cautious approach to testing and deployment. "We're in a competitive landscape, Jenna," he'd say. "We can't afford to spend 3 weeks testing what our competitors push out in 3 days." My concerns about proper quality assurance were increasingly labeled as resistance to change. Younger team members began to view me as the obstacle to innovation rather than its guardian. The hallway conversations that used to stop by my office for guidance now flowed toward Tyler's corner space, with its glass walls and motivational posters about disruption. One night, working late to finish documentation, I walked down the dim hallway toward the break room for coffee. Passing by my own office, I noticed the door slightly ajar and the lights on. Quietly approaching, I saw Tyler hunched over my computer, a flash drive plugged into the USB port. On my desk lay my personal notebook, open to the pages detailing my energy efficiency algorithm. I froze, watching as he took photos of my handwritten notes with his phone, then began copying files from my protected work folders. My heart pounded as the betrayal sank in. This wasn't collaboration or knowledge transfer. This was theft. The next morning, I confronted Tyler in the small conference room, away from curious ears. "I saw you in my office last night," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You were copying my files and photographing my notes without permission." Tyler's expression barely flickered. "You're overreacting, Jenna. I was just getting up to speed on your project. Dad wants me fully integrated into all our key initiatives." He leaned back in his chair, completely unconcerned. "Besides, it's company property, not your personal intellectual property." "My notebook is personal," I countered. "And accessing my computer after hours, without permission, violates company policy." Tyler smiled that same empty smile. "You know, this territorial approach is exactly what Dad means when he talks about old-school thinking holding us back. In modern companies, information flows freely." Before I could respond, my phone pinged with a meeting request from David. Subject line: Team restructuring. My stomach dropped. In the meeting, David was all corporate smiles and management speak. "Jenna, you've been an incredible asset to this company. Which is why I think it's time for some knowledge transfer. I'm assigning Tyler to shadow you more formally. He needs to learn from the best." "He was in my office last night copying my files without permission," I said flatly. David's smile tightened. "I'm sure there's a misunderstanding. Tyler is eager to learn. And sometimes enthusiasm looks like overstepping to those of us from a different generation." The implication was clear. I was the problem, not Tyler's behavior. I left that meeting with a growing sense of dread. Over the next several weeks, I noticed key members of my team being reassigned to a new project without explanation. When I asked our HR director, Amy, about it, she gave vague responses about resource optimization. Once friendly colleagues became strangely evasive when I asked what they were working on. Meeting invitations that once automatically included me now required me to ask for access. Then came the mysterious references to a revolutionary product in company-wide emails. Something that should have fallen squarely under my purview as technical director. Yet I wasn't included on a single thread about it. When I directly asked David what was happening, he assured me it was early stages and promised to loop me in when appropriate. One afternoon, I tried to access my performance reviews to prepare for my annual evaluation, only to discover they had been altered. Comments praising my methodical approach had been removed or edited to emphasize adherence to traditional methods rather than thoroughness. Positive feedback about my innovations had disappeared entirely. Passing the break room one day, I overheard Tyler holding court with several junior developers. "The algorithm completely revolutionizes how we handle resource allocation," he was saying, describing my energy efficiency innovation in precise detail. I've been working on this concept since business school, actually. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to him take credit for years of my work, unable to believe the brazenness of the theft. The younger developers were clearly impressed, nodding along as Tyler explained his breakthrough. Not one of them questioned why they'd never heard him mention this work before, or why the technical director wasn't involved. Sleep became increasingly difficult as anxiety about my position grew. 16 years of my life had been invested in this company. My identity was intertwined with my work. The thought of losing it all sent me into panic attacks that left me gasping for breath in the middle of the night. Then came the email that confirmed my worst fears. It wasn't even meant for me. Someone in HR had accidentally included me on a thread about the transition plan. The message detailed how my responsibilities would be gradually shifted to Tyler over the next month, with an eventual reorganization that would eliminate my position entirely. They even discussed how to frame my departure to minimize legal risks, suggesting they would cite resistance to new methodologies and inability to adapt to changing market conditions. I stared at my screen, my vision blurring with tears of rage and betrayal. 16 years of loyalty, and they were plotting to discard me like outdated technology. Worse, they were stealing my most innovative work in the process. I printed the email and slipped it into my bag, hands shaking. For the first time in my career, I left work early, unable to maintain my professional facade while my world collapsed around me. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I paced my apartment, alternating between tears of grief and flashes of white-hot anger. By morning, I had made a decision. I would not go quietly. I would document everything, protect what was mine, and prepare for the storm I knew was coming. I had no idea just how soon it would arrive. 3 days later, at precisely 3:30 on Friday afternoon, my calendar pinged with an unexpected meeting request. Strategic Discussion Glass Conference Room. David and HR. The timing couldn't have been more textbook if they'd followed a how to fire someone manual. Friday afternoon, end of pay period. Minimizing the chance of immediate disruption, I took a deep breath, saved my work, and locked my computer. If this was what I thought it was, I wanted to face it with dignity. I grabbed my personal notebook, the one containing all my original algorithm notes, and slipped it into my bag. Something told me I shouldn't leave it in my desk. The glass conference room was Nexus's designated space for difficult conversations. Transparent walls that created the illusion of openness, while the soundproofing ensured privacy, the perfect metaphor for the company culture under David's leadership. David sat at the head of the table, face arranged in an expression of corporate concern. Amy from HR sat beside him with a folder of papers. And there, lounging against the wall with poorly disguised satisfaction, was Tyler. "Jenna? Thank you for joining us," David began, as if I had a choice. "This isn't an easy conversation, but Nexus is moving in a new direction that requires fresh perspectives and agile thinking." I remained silent, watching him deliver the speech he'd clearly rehearsed. The technology landscape is evolving rapidly, and we need leadership that embraces change rather than resists it. Your contributions have been valuable, but your approach is too old school for modern business. The words stung despite their predictability. 16 years reduced to too old school. We've decided to eliminate your position and redistribute your responsibilities. Today will be your last day. Tyler shifted his weight, eyes flicking toward my soon-to-be former office. He wasn't even trying to hide his eagerness to claim my space, my team, my work. "My entire department will report to Tyler now?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. David nodded. "Tyler has demonstrated the forward-thinking approach we need. He's already spearheading our most promising innovation in years." The audacity was breathtaking. They were firing me, and, in the same breath, giving Tyler credit for my work. "The energy efficiency algorithm," I said flatly. "My algorithm." David's expression hardened. All work done here is company property, Jenna. And frankly, Tyler's refinements have transformed the initial concept into something truly revolutionary. Amy slid a severance agreement across the table. We're offering 6 months' salary, contingent upon a standard non-disparagement agreement and waiver of claims. I didn't touch the papers. I'd like to review this with my attorney. David's smile tightened. Of course, though I should mention the offer is only valid for 48 hours. Classic pressure tactic. I stood up, gathering my dignity along with my bag. I'll have my response by then. Security will escort you to collect your personal items, David said. The final humiliation in this carefully choreographed dismissal. A security guard I'd known for years, Tim, whose daughter's college application I'd helped with just months ago, waited outside the conference room, unable to meet my eyes. Together we walked through the open office where colleagues stared at their screens with sudden intensity, pretending not to witness my disgrace. At my desk, Tim handed me a cardboard box. 16 years reduced to whatever would fit in a standard banker's box. I took down the few photos, collected my coffee mug, and unplugged my phone charger. Everything else, the awards, the recognition plaques, the thank you notes from team members, all felt tainted now. Tim stood awkwardly nearby as I packed, clearly uncomfortable with his role in this process. "I'm sorry, Jenna," he whispered when no one was looking. The final indignity came at the exit. David had arranged to have the entire executive team in a spontaneous hallway meeting, forcing me to walk past them with my box of belongings. A corporate walk of shame. I held my head high, meeting each of their eyes as I passed. Some looked away. A few had the decency to appear uncomfortable. Tyler, though, watched with undisguised triumph. The drive home passed in a blur. 16 years gone in a 30-minute meeting. My identity, my professional reputation, my financial security, all suddenly uncertain. I spent that weekend in a daze of grief and anger. I cycled through disbelief, rage, and paralyzing anxiety. I tried calling colleagues I'd considered friends, but their responses were tellingly brief. "So sorry to hear that, Jenna. Wishing you the best. Let's grab coffee sometime soon." The universal platitudes of people who had already written you off. By Sunday night, the shock had begun to crystallize into something harder. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by tissues and takeout containers, scrolling through job listings that suddenly felt alien. Who was I without Nexus? What was my value if 16 years of loyalty could be discarded so easily? That's when I noticed the laptop. In the blur of Friday's humiliation, I hadn't registered that the computer in my cardboard box wasn't my personal laptop. It was one of the company's development machines. Tim must have grabbed the wrong one from my desk in the awkwardness of the moment. I opened it, expecting to be blocked by security protocols. Instead, it booted directly to an open email thread. Tyler's email still logged in. My breath caught as I began to read. There it was, in black and white, a detailed discussion between Tyler and David about leveraging Jenna's algorithm as the cornerstone of their new product launch. Tyler had attached my original design documents, my test results, everything he'd stolen from my computer that night. Most damning of all was David's response. "Make sure all documentation lists you as the sole inventor. We need a clean break from Jenna's contribution before the patent filing next month." They weren't just stealing my job, they were stealing my intellectual property and planning to patent it under Tyler's name. I sat back, a strange calm replacing the weekend's emotional chaos. This wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. And they had handed me the evidence on a silver platter. The depression hit hard in the weeks following my termination. I'd wake up at my normal time, ready for work, only to remember I had nowhere to go. The rhythm of 16 years doesn't disappear overnight. I kept reaching for my security badge each morning. Phantom muscle memory of a life suddenly gone. Finding new employment proved unexpectedly difficult. The tech industry in Boston is relatively small, and rumors spread quickly. My first interviews seemed promising until the inevitable question, why did you leave Nexus after so many years? No matter how diplomatically I answered, I could see the doubt creeping into the interviewer's expression. Someone had been talking, painting me as difficult, outdated, resistant to innovation. By month 3, my emergency fund was dwindling. I had always been financially responsible, but Boston's cost of living doesn't allow for extended unemployment. Each rejected application chipped away at my confidence. Was I truly obsolete at 38? Had the industry really changed so much that my skills were worthless? I was sitting in a corner of Blue Bottle Coffee, half-heartedly updating my resume, when someone tapped my shoulder. Jenna? I thought that was you. I looked up to see Marcus Chen, one of the senior developers from my team at Nexus. We'd worked closely for years, but he hadn't responded to any of my messages after my termination. Mind if I sit? He asked, glancing around nervously. Free country, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Marcus slid into the chair across from me, leaning forward and lowering his voice. I've been wanting to reach out, but they're monitoring our communications. David has IT checking for your name in emails and messages. That explained the silence from my former colleagues. Why the paranoia? Because Tyler is taking full credit for your algorithm, and they're worried you'll make noise about it. Marcus looked genuinely troubled. They're calling it Parker's Efficiency Protocol. There's a major announcement planned next month. The confirmation of what I'd suspected sent a fresh wave of anger through me. They can't just steal my work. They're saying Tyler had the concept in business school and brought it to Nexus. That you were just helping implement his vision. Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. Most of the new hires believe it. Those of us who know better have been sidelined or are too afraid of losing our jobs to speak up. What about the documentation? My design notes? The test results? Recreated or modified? Tyler's name is on everything now. He hesitated. Jenna, they're filing for a patent. The application goes in next week. I felt physically ill. Years of my work, my greatest innovation, being stolen in plain sight. There's something else, Marcus continued, checking his watch nervously. Nexus secured a presentation with Horizon Capital. They're the biggest tech investment firm in the country. David's pitching them on Tyler's breakthrough as the future of cloud computing. If they invest, we're talking hundreds of millions. I sat back, mind racing. When is the presentation? 3 months from now. Listen, I have to go before someone spots us together. Marcus stood. I'm sorry, Jenna. What they're doing isn't right. After he left, I sat motionless. Coffee cooling forgotten before me. For weeks, I'd been focused on personal survival. Finding a new job. Preserving my dwindling savings. But this changed everything. They weren't just pushing me out, they were stealing my intellectual legacy. That night, I dug out my personal notebook, the one I'd instinctively grabbed during my final moments at Nexus. Inside were all my original notes on the algorithm. Dated entries stretching back 18 months. Detailed diagrams. Test results. Even my early failures. Most importantly, it contained my breakthrough realization about dynamic resource allocation that made the whole system work, written in my handwriting, dated nearly a year before Tyler even joined the company. The next morning, I called Grace Wilson, a patent attorney recommended by an old college friend. I wasn't sure what to expect. Patent litigation is notoriously expensive, but I needed to understand my options. Grace's office was smaller than I'd imagined, but her reputation was apparently well-earned. She listened intently as I explained my situation, examining my notebook with professional interest. This documentation is excellent, she said finally. Most inventors don't keep such detailed records with clear dates. Can they really just steal my work like this? No, but proving it can be challenging. Grace flipped through more pages. The good news is your notebook establishes prior art. If you invented this before Tyler claimed to, and can prove it, you have rights regardless of their patent application. So I can stop them? Potentially. We can file our own patent application immediately based on your documentation. We can also prepare for potential litigation. She looked at me directly. But I have to be honest, Jenna. This will be expensive, and you're going up against a company with significantly more resources. The reality of my situation hit home. I was unemployed, rapidly depleting my savings, and now considering legal action that could cost tens of thousands of dollars I didn't have. What about contingency? I asked. If we win, could you take a percentage? Grace considered this. The potential value of this patent, if it's as significant as you describe, yes, I might consider a modified contingency arrangement, but we need more evidence of their intent to misappropriate. That night, I made a risky decision. I contacted Marcus, asking if he would help document what was happening inside Nexus. His response was cautious but supportive. I don't want to lose my job, but what they're doing is wrong. Tell me what you need. Over the next few weeks, Marcus became my inside source, carefully gathering evidence without raising suspicions. He forwarded internal emails, showing Tyler taking credit for my work. He documented meetings where my contributions were deliberately erased from the company narrative. Most importantly, he confirmed that the patent application had indeed been filed with Tyler, listed as the sole inventor. Meanwhile, I scoured industry publications, tracking Nexus's public statements about their upcoming innovation. The business press was already celebrating Tyler Parker as a wonderkind, a visionary young leader transforming cloud computing. Each article felt like a personal attack, watching someone else receive acclaim for my years of work. Then came the most disturbing discovery. Marcus sent me internal test results, showing that Tyler had modified my original algorithm in an attempt to improve it. His changes had introduced serious security vulnerabilities that could potentially expose client data. Worse, David was pressuring the testing team to downplay these issues in their reports. They're pushing this to market regardless of the problems, Marcus wrote. David says they can patch it later, after they secure the Horizon funding. This wasn't just about my intellectual property anymore. It was about a fundamentally flawed technology being rushed to market, potentially putting countless systems and their data at risk. I brought the new information to Grace, who agreed it strengthened our case considerably. We filed our own patent application, using my original documentation as evidence of prior invention. The legal fees drained the last of my savings, but I was beyond caring about money. This had become a matter of principle, of justice. As I left Grace's office, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The voice that answered belonged to Walter Graham, Nexus's retired founder. Jenna, he said, his voice warm with familiar concern. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. We need to talk about what my son-in-law is doing to my company. Walter suggested meeting at his home rather than in public. Fewer eyes and ears, he explained. His Georgian colonial in Brookline was exactly as I remembered from company gatherings years ago, elegant but unpretentious, like Walter himself. I owe you an apology, he said as we settled in his study. I never imagined David would take the company in this direction when I handed him the reins. I could see the genuine distress in Walter's eyes. This wasn't just a company to him. It was his life's work, his legacy. And now he was watching it transform into something he didn't recognize. How did you find out what happened? I asked. I still have friends on the board. And contrary to what David thinks, not everyone is comfortable with how you were treated. Walter sighed heavily. When I heard they were attributing your efficiency algorithm to Tyler, I knew something was seriously wrong. I've followed your work on that project for years. The validation from Walter, the person whose opinion I'd always valued most, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. After months of doubting my own worth, his recognition meant everything. I've already taken some steps, I explained, telling him about the patent application and the evidence Marcus was gathering. Good. But it may not be enough, Walter said grimly. David has the company's resources behind him, and he's convinced the board that this breakthrough will take Nexus to the next level. Most of them don't understand the technology enough to question whether Tyler really created it. So what can we do? Walter leaned forward, his expression hardening. Hit them where it matters. The Horizon Capital presentation. If David loses that funding, the board will start asking much harder questions. He outlined what he knew about the upcoming investor meeting. Horizon Capital was considering a $200 million investment in Nexus, primarily based on the potential of Tyler's algorithm. The presentation was scheduled for exactly 3 months from now. I still hold significant influence with certain board members, Walter explained. I can secure you an invitation to that meeting as my guest, but you'll need irrefutable evidence that the algorithm is yours and that their implementation is fundamentally flawed. The plan began to take shape over the next several hours. Walter would work the board connections, creating subtle doubt about Tyler's sudden genius. Grace would accelerate our patent challenge, creating legal pressure. Marcus would continue documenting internal issues with the modified algorithm, and I would prepare a comprehensive file proving my ownership and highlighting the security vulnerabilities Tyler had introduced. The stakes were enormous. My legal fees were mounting daily, draining my modest savings at an alarming rate. I had started taking freelance coding projects to stay afloat, but the constant stress was taking a physical toll. I'd lost weight, developed insomnia, and found myself jumping at unexpected sounds, all signs of the anxiety that had become my constant companion. Still, for the first time since my termination, I had purpose. Every day was dedicated to building our case, methodically preparing for the confrontation to come. Marcus continued to be my eyes and ears inside Nexus, though his position grew increasingly precarious. "They're getting paranoid," he reported during one of our secure calls. "David's instituted new data security protocols. I think they suspect information is leaking." "Be careful," I urged. "Your job isn't worth the risk. It's not just about your algorithm anymore," Marcus replied, his voice uncharacteristically emotional. "The whole company culture has become toxic. People are afraid to speak up about anything. Quality control is being steamrolled for speed. This isn't the Nexus I joined." His next update confirmed our worst fears about the modified algorithm. "They ran a full system test yesterday. The security vulnerabilities are even worse than we thought. Under certain conditions, the system could expose client data across server instances. Are they addressing it? David says they'll fix it after the Horizon presentation. He doesn't want anything delaying the investment round." Marcus's disgust was palpable. "Tyler doesn't even understand why it's happening. He modified your code without grasping the underlying architecture." This revelation changed the stakes yet again. We weren't just fighting for my intellectual property rights or justice for my wrongful termination. We were potentially preventing a major security disaster that could affect thousands of clients if Nexus deployed the flawed system. Grace was making progress on the legal front, though the process was frustratingly slow. "Patent challenges take time," she reminded me. "But we filed all the necessary paperwork establishing your prior claim. The documentation in your notebook is proving invaluable." As the weeks passed, my freelance work barely kept me financially afloat. I sold my car, cut every possible expense, and still barely made rent each month. But giving up wasn't an option. This fight had become about something much larger than my personal grievance. Walter arranged a private meeting with 2 board members he still trusted, carefully planting seeds of doubt about Tyler's sudden technical brilliance. "I'm not making accusations," he told me he'd said. "I'm just suggesting that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And a business school graduate developing a revolutionary algorithm with no prior technical background is certainly extraordinary." 1 month before the Horizon presentation, we finalized our strategy. Walter had secured my invitation as his personal guest. A retired founder bringing a technical advisor would raise no immediate alarms. Grace had prepared legal documentation establishing my claim to the intellectual property. Marcus had compiled internal emails and test results showing both Tyler's false claims and the dangerous flaws in his modified version. I organized everything into a single comprehensive folder, clear, concise, and devastating in its implications. The evidence was irrefutable. Documentation proving I had developed the algorithm long before Tyler joined Nexus. Internal communications showing the deliberate effort to erase my contribution. Technical analysis demonstrating how Tyler's modifications had compromised the system's security. "This is exceptionally thorough," Walter said, reviewing the final package. "Methodical and meticulous, exactly the qualities that made you invaluable to Nexus." The validation helped ease the knot of anxiety that had taken permanent residence in my chest. "Do you think it will be enough?" Walter's expression was grim but determined. Horizon Capital didn't build their reputation by backing intellectual property theft or fundamentally flawed technology. When they see this evidence, David will have a very difficult decision to make. As the presentation date approached, Marcus reported increasing tension within Nexus. Initial client testing had revealed some of the security issues, but David was pressuring the development team to implement temporary patches rather than addressing the fundamental flaws in Tyler's modifications. "He keeps saying they can fix everything properly after the Horizon deal closes," Marcus told me. "People are uncomfortable, but no one's willing to risk their job by pushing back too hard." The night before the presentation, I barely slept. The past 6 months had been building to this moment. My financial resources were nearly depleted, my professional reputation in tatters, my confidence repeatedly challenged. But tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. I laid out my outfit for the meeting, a charcoal gray suit I hadn't worn since my last Nexus presentation, a subtle reminder of the professional they had discarded. In my briefcase, I placed the folder containing all our evidence, the culmination of months of strategic preparation. Tomorrow would determine not just my future, but potentially the future of Nexus itself. I was ready. The morning of the Horizon Capital presentation dawned clear and cold, a perfect Boston autumn day. I dressed carefully, applying makeup to cover the dark circles from months of stress and sleepless nights. The woman in the mirror looked composed and professional, giving no hint of the turmoil beneath the surface. Walter picked me up in his Mercedes, his presence reassuringly steady. "Remember," he said as we drove downtown, "we're not just fighting for your algorithm. We're fighting for the soul of the company. I built a company that once valued integrity above all else." Horizon Capital occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming tower in Boston's financial district. The reception area exuded quiet wealth, understated furnishings that probably cost more than my annual salary, artwork by recognizable names, views that showcased the harbor in dramatic panorama. "Walter Graham," my former mentor announced to the receptionist. "And my guest, Jenna Davis. We're here for the Nexus Innovations presentation." She checked her tablet. "Yes, Mr. Graham. The team from Nexus is already in conference room A. I'll show you in." My heart pounded as we followed her down a hushed hallway. In moments, I would face the people who had betrayed me, stolen my work, and destroyed my career. 6 months of anger, preparation, and determination crystallized into a strange calm. I had truth on my side. The conference room door opened to reveal a scene straight from a corporate brochure. Around a massive table sat the Horizon investment team in impeccable suits, looking expectantly toward David Parker at the front of the room. Tyler stood nearby, trying to project confidence but betrayed by a nervous adjustment of his tie. The moment David spotted us, his professionally neutral expression faltered. Shock, alarm, and fury flashed across his face in quick succession before he recovered his corporate mask. "Walter," he said, voice tight with forced pleasantry. "We weren't expecting you." "I hope you don't mind," Walter replied smoothly. "As founder, I maintain a keen interest in Nexus's future. And Miss Davis is here as my technical advisor." Tyler had gone visibly pale, his eyes darting between me and his father. A distinguished man at the head of the table stood to greet us. "Walter Graham. An honor to meet you, sir. I'm Jackson Reed, managing partner at Horizon. We're all admirers of what you built at Nexus." Introductions continued around the table as Walter and I took seats at the back of the room. David's discomfort was palpable, but there was nothing he could do without creating a scene in front of potential investors. "Let's proceed with the presentation," Jackson suggested, seemingly unaware of the tension. David launched into a polished pitch about Nexus's history of innovation and its vision for the future. He was a skilled speaker, I had to admit, weaving a compelling narrative about the company's trajectory. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. "Today, we're unveiling a technological breakthrough that will redefine cloud computing," David announced. "The Parker Efficiency Protocol, developed by our innovation director, Tyler Parker, reduces energy consumption in server environments by nearly 40% with no performance degradation." Tyler stepped forward, clicking to the first slide of his presentation. I recognized my own diagrams, slightly modified but unmistakably my work. The same concepts, the same architecture, even some of the same phrasing I had used in my documentation. "The fundamental insight," Tyler explained, his confidence growing as he spoke, came from reconceptualizing how resources are allocated across virtual instances. It was surreal watching him present my work, my insights, my breakthrough as if they were his own creation. He had memorized the technical details well enough to sound knowledgeable to non-experts, but I could spot the moments where his understanding faltered, where he glossed over complexities he didn't truly comprehend. The Horizon team listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that Tyler answered with rehearsed responses. I remained silent, watching, waiting for the right moment. "The market implications are substantial," David continued, moving to the business portion of the presentation. "Conservative estimates suggest a potential market of $2 billion annually, with Nexus positioned to capture at least 30% within 5 years. The financial projections were impressive, I had to admit. If the technology worked as promised, which it wouldn't, given Tyler's flawed modifications, the returns would be exceptional." Questions from the investors became more specific, more technical. Tyler began to struggle, his responses growing vaguer as they probed areas beyond his superficial understanding. "What about security implications?" asked a sharp-eyed woman from the Horizon team. "Dynamic resource allocation often creates vulnerability gaps." Tyler hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. "We've implemented a comprehensive security protocol that addresses all potential vulnerabilities." It was a non-answer, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. Several investors exchanged glances. "We've been thorough in our testing." David jumped in, trying to move past the question. "Security is always our top priority at Nexus." Jackson Reed had been mostly quiet during the presentation, but now he leaned forward. "Actually, we've been conducting our own due diligence on this technology. Remarkable innovation often attracts attention, and we received some concerning information regarding both its origin and implementation." The room went still. David's smile froze in place. "What kind of information?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Allegations that the core algorithm wasn't developed by Mr. Parker at all, but by a former employee." Jackson's gaze moved deliberately to where I sat Saturday, and concerning test results suggesting security vulnerabilities in the current implementation. David's face flushed with anger. "I can assure you those allegations are completely unfounded. Disgruntled former employees often make baseless claims." "I believe Miss Davis is here," Jackson interrupted. "Perhaps she could address these concerns directly." All eyes in the room turned to me. The moment I had prepared for had arrived. I stood up, smoothing my suit jacket with steady hands. 6 months of preparation had led to this moment. And surprisingly, I felt absolutely calm. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I'm Jenna Davis. Until 6 months ago, I was the technical director at Nexus Innovations, where I worked for 16 years. I stepped forward, moving closer to the presentation screen, still displaying my architecture diagrams. And yes, I am the original creator of what's being called the Parker Efficiency Protocol, an algorithm I developed and documented over 18 months before Tyler Parker joined the company. David started to interrupt, but Jackson held up a hand, silencing him. Please continue, Miss Davis. I have comprehensive documentation proving my claim, I said, opening my folder. But more importantly, I need to address the security concerns you mentioned. I turned to face the Horizon team directly. The original algorithm was secure by design. However, modifications made after my departure have introduced critical vulnerabilities that could potentially expose client data across server instances. Tyler's face had gone from pale to ashen. David was practically vibrating with suppressed rage. These are baseless accusations from a terminated employee, he sputtered. Miss Davis was let go for performance issues and resistance to innovation. She's clearly retaliating. I was terminated after 16 years of exemplary service, I corrected, because I knew too much about who really created this technology. I placed my folder on the table and slid it toward Jackson Reed. Everything you need to verify my claims is in this file. Original dated documentation, internal communications, test results demonstrating the security flaws, and my patent application predating Nexus's filing. Jackson opened the folder, examining its contents with methodical care. The room was silent, except for the gentle sound of papers being turned. David and Tyler exchanged increasingly panicked glances. This is quite thorough, Jackson finally said, looking up at me. Particularly troubling are these test results showing data exposure during concurrent operations. Preliminary tests that were addressed in subsequent development, David insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. Tyler made significant improvements after those results. That's not what your current development team reports, I replied, gesturing to the emails Marcus had provided. As of last week, these issues remain unresolved, with instructions to implement temporary patches for demonstration purposes only. Jackson turned to one of his colleagues. Allison, you reviewed the technical documentation. Your assessment? The sharp-eyed woman who had questioned Tyler earlier nodded. Based on what I'm seeing here, Miss Davis's claims appear credible. The original documentation predates Mr. Parker's employment by over a year, and these security vulnerability reports are concerning. This is outrageous, David exploded. You're making investment decisions based on stolen internal documents? And the claims of a disgruntled ex-employee? Actually, Walter spoke up from the back of the room, his voice carrying the weight of his reputation. I can personally attest to Jenna's role in developing this technology. I followed her progress from initial concept through testing. The board minutes from that period reflect my reports on her work. Jackson Reed studied the faces around the room, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to David. Mr. Parker, Horizon Capital doesn't invest in companies that build their future on stolen intellectual property or fundamentally flawed technology. Both appear to be the case here. David paled. There's been a misunderstanding. We can clarify. What requires clarification, Jackson interrupted, is whether Miss Davis's work was misappropriated, and whether your company knowingly attempted to secure investment based on flawed technology and false claims of innovation. He turned to me. Miss Davis, what outcome are you seeking here? The question caught me off guard. For months, I'd been focused on exposing the truth, on preventing the theft of my work. I hadn't fully considered what justice would look like. I want recognition for my work and protection of my intellectual property rights, I said after a moment's thought. And I want to ensure this technology is implemented correctly, without the security flaws that could harm clients. Jackson nodded. Both reasonable requests. He turned back to David. Mr. Parker, you have a decision to make. Horizon could still be interested in this technology. It is genuinely innovative, but only under conditions that recognize Miss Davis's contribution and address the security concerns. David looked like he might be physically ill. What conditions? Miss Davis would need to be brought back to Nexus in an appropriate leadership position to oversee the correct implementation of her algorithm. She would need to be acknowledged as the primary inventor on all patent applications. And there would need to be a significant compensation package, recognizing both her past contribution and the attempted misappropriation of her work. The room went silent as David processed these terms. His gaze moved from Jackson to me, then to Tyler, who sat with his head bowed, the picture of defeat. "If I refuse?" David finally asked. "Then Horizon will not be investing in Nexus," Jackson stated flatly. "And given what we now know, I suspect other potential investors would come to the same conclusion once this information reaches them." Walter stepped forward. "David, the board will want to know why a $200 million investment opportunity collapsed. With this documentation, they'll have a very clear picture of what happened." I could almost see the calculations running behind David's eyes, his position, his reputation, his son's career, the company's future, all hanging in the balance. Before he could respond, I surprised myself by speaking up. "Actually, I have a counter-proposal." All eyes turned to me. "I don't want to return to Nexus," I said, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. The culture and values I believed in no longer exist there. Instead, I propose to start my own company implementing this technology correctly. If Horizon is interested in the algorithm's potential, they could invest in my venture instead. Jackson's eyebrows rose with interest. An intriguing alternative. We would certainly consider that option. David's face darkened with fury. "You can't just—" "Actually, she can," Walter interrupted. "And given the circumstances, it might be the cleanest solution for everyone." He turned to me. "I'd be interested in joining this new venture, perhaps as chairman of the board. My non-compete with Nexus expired last year." The implications weren't lost on anyone in the room. Walter Graham, founder and former CEO of Nexus, lending his considerable reputation and expertise to a competing startup, would be a devastating blow. "This is blackmail," David hissed. "No," I corrected him calmly. "This is consequences. You fired me after 16 years of loyal service, stole my intellectual property, attempted to patent it under your son's name, and were prepared to release a flawed implementation that could have harmed clients. These are simply the natural results of those actions." Jackson closed my folder and handed it back to me. "Miss Davis, I believe we should continue this discussion separately. Horizon would be very interested in exploring investment in your new venture, especially with Walter's involvement." He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Mr. Parker, thank you for your presentation. Unfortunately, Horizon will not be proceeding with an investment in Nexus at this time." The Nexus team sat in stunned silence as the Horizon partners filed out of the room. Jackson paused at the door. "Miss Davis, Walter, perhaps we could continue our conversation over lunch? My assistant will arrange a private dining room." As we followed Jackson out, I caught a final glimpse of David and Tyler. The CEO's face was a mask of contained rage, while his son simply looked broken, the consequences of his actions finally sinking in. In that moment, I felt no triumph, no desire to gloat, only relief that justice had finally been served. 1 year later, I stood at the podium during the launch event for Davis Innovations' flagship product, the Efficiency Engine, built on my original algorithm but now perfected and fully secure. The journey from that Horizon Capital meeting to today had been intense but exhilarating. With Walter's guidance and Horizon's investment, I had built something I was genuinely proud of, not just technology, but a company culture that valued integrity and recognized contribution. My team included several former Nexus employees, including Marcus, who had resigned the day after the Horizon presentation. The fallout at Nexus had been significant. Once the board learned the full story, David had been asked to resign. Tyler had left the tech industry entirely. The company was struggling to rebuild its reputation after the scandal became public. As I looked out at the audience of industry leaders, potential clients, and my dedicated team, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me during the darkest days after my termination. The most important innovation isn't always technological, I concluded my speech. Sometimes it's creating environments where ethics and excellence can thrive together, where credit is given where it's due, where doing the right thing matters as much as doing things right. The applause was gratifying, but even more meaningful were the nods of agreement from my team. We had built something valuable together. Not just a product, but a community based on mutual respect and recognition. Later that evening, I met with a group of young female engineers who had requested mentorship. As we talked over dinner, one of them asked the question I'd heard most often since my story became public. "Weren't you afraid? Going up against your former company, risking everything?" I considered this carefully. I was terrified, I admitted. But I discovered something important along the way. Your value isn't determined by a job title or a company's recognition. It comes from knowing your own worth and being willing to stand up for it, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. They nodded, absorbing this. Document your work, I advised them with a smile. Know your rights. And never let anyone convince you that you're too old school when what you're really being is thorough, methodical, and correct. The journey had transformed me in ways I never expected. I was stronger now, more confident in my abilities and my worth. The pain and betrayal had forged something resilient within me, a deep understanding that while you can't always prevent injustice, you can always choose how you respond to it. And sometimes, in that response, you build something far better than what you lost. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when others tried to take credit for your hard work? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, and share with someone who might need a reminder of their own worth today. Thank you for listening. And remember, your value isn't determined by others' recognition, but by your own integrity and courage.